Welcome to CityLit Project's Baltimore API Spotlight for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Each week throughout the month of May, we will be featuring a series of readings and interview videos posted to our social media and YouTube page, and so showcasing some of the great Asian American writers, poets, playwrights, and graphic artists that are brewing up some goodness in Charm City. So be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at CityLit Project, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll be alerted when each of these videos goes up throughout the month. My name is Aditya Desai. I'm a writer and editor in Baltimore, and I've been working with CityLit Project since 2016 as a volunteer, board member, and secretary. And today I am very pleased and excited to bring you the poet and visual artist, Ryan Artis. Say hi, Ryan.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, wonderful. Well, it's great to have you. Why don't we start with a short reading from you? And yeah, if you'd like to share some of your work, and then we can maybe
Yeah,
talk
this
about it.
poem. So, like this poem, I was adopted for. I was adopted when I was 1 month old. I came to the United States, and I never, just like in this past month, as a result of a post on social media where someone asked, "How far are you from where you were born?" I'm 38 years old, and I've never calculated that distance. And as one does in 2021, I immediately just typed it into the search engine, and the distance was 8,049 miles. The distance between Baltimore and Kolkata, it was called Calcutta when I was born and flew here, a distance I never calculated until requested by a friend in a social media post just 2 weeks ago. Why? How? It seems crazy that I have never calculated this distance. I recently read an article comparing adoption to slavery from a 10-page article in an anthology that has been on my bookshelf for almost 2 decades that I have never picked up. This is what I've been saying about how it feels, but how am I supposed to explain that? Nothing wants to suffer. Could I have somehow known that at 1 month old and chosen, could I have somehow known that at 1 month old and chosen this, which is somehow supposed to be the easier path? The world is actually unbearable. I know this to be absolutely true, and yet I keep on living. This English, I bear it, a master's axe, and I will keep swinging it, and I will keep swinging it, and I will keep swinging it, and I will keep swinging it until I tear down these walls inside of me, and then I will rebuild, and then I will rebuild.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, so, do you want to tell us a little bit about what uh, inspired writing those pieces? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about looking up the distance between where you live and where you were born, and kind of trying to
Absolutely.
capture that physical distance. But that poem is also very introspective, and it seems like it's also grappling with maybe some kind of an internal distance. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, and so that, yeah, definitely the distance was really just kind of like the framework for the poem. It wasn't really what inspired it, but I was really inspired by the local artist, Pierre Banu, who works out of like his art space is called Exit the Apple on Guilford Avenue, and he was doing these Sunday morning art meditation sessions, and some of his work revolved around writing and drawing with your non-dominant hand as a way of tapping into parts of your brain that you don't that are normally dormant, that you don't normally tap into. For example, your inner child, and these parts of your brain that you don't normally access simply by just writing with your non-dominant hand. And so I was really inspired by those exercises, and I started as a way, because a lot of the work I've been creating recently is with the explicit reason to share. And in the past, for the first 36, 37 years of my life, I created work that was solely for me. And so I've been thinking about how do I in this creation of work that I'm creating to share, how do I also create work that is for me? And so while I'm writing, I shift back and forth between writing with my dominant hand and my non-dominant hand. And so while this work, so that's what ultimately inspired this work, is that it's stuff that I would really never consider sharing, but by writing it in such a matter, in such a personal way that allows it to retain a meaning that's personal solely to me, makes it that much safer to share. And so I think that your insight about the distance is really spot on now that I think about it, in a way so directly that I hadn't thought before.
Sure, sure, definitely. Well, so maybe let's take that a little bit further. Why do you write? What's your writing origin story?
Oh my, okay. So this is, I mean, my writing origin story. I started journaling, in a journal I received for Christmas in December of 1992. And so I've been journaling off and on in some capacity ever since then.
Mhm.
Next, I was doing some calculations about that recently, and by next Christmas, the Christmas of 2022, I'll have been journaling for 30 of the 40 years of my life. And I've started to, I've part of this inner child work I've done is to start to go back and do that excruciating task of reading some of my
Mm,
old journals, and some of my old thoughts. But by doing these exercises of tapping into these parts of my memory and my brain that I wasn't otherwise tapped into before reading these journals, if that makes sense, that I'm kind of more prepared for this like crazy time travel journey that I'm really on, because now that I'm like writing these memories back to this place, I can like sit in them and like walk around and like see other circumstances of my life that were going on that I couldn't necessarily just immediately connect with, if that makes sense.
mhm. Yeah, no, it totally does. So, I mean, that's really fascinating. And in the process of doing that, are there um, things that have kind of jumped out to you? Maybe because you're seeing them in a new light, or maybe just being an older person, maybe you're focusing on different aspects of your life.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't even know how to answer that because the answer is absolutely yes. Like I just everything
Sure.
seems so clear, and I'm seeing things and able to explain things in a way that I've never been able to before. Um,
Mhm. Well, here I wanted to ask. Maybe we can bring it back to the themes of these videos. Maybe how do you see your writing as part of the larger API narrative, whether you're continuing certain narratives or maybe pushing against other narratives or recontextualizing. But when you think of yourself in conversation with other
well,
Asian American writers?
that's really a great question, because specifically the reason that I write um, is to understand this really quite complex identity, which I've been dealt, and I've written about it endlessly privately, and now that I start to, and it's something that I've never felt I've never felt Asian enough. I've always been very my age. I've always been, because I was adopted into a white family. I've always been very isolated from my Asian family and my Asian identity, and therefore an Asian community. And so as I start to share some of my inner thoughts and some of my stories, realizing that as an adoptee, that my story is also one of migration and of an immigrant,
Mhm.
and just of a very different kind of forced migration that mimics, for example, some markets of slavery, which is something that I alluded to in the poem, which I definitely am down to talk about later in the conversation. But I just lost my train of thought, and I'm trying to get back on to my train of thought, um, which was
Well, you were talking about how writing
oh yeah,
is a way of connecting back to your.
so by sharing these things I've never shared before,
Mhm.
Aditya, I'm realizing and getting understanding, and that people are relating to what I'm writing, that I'm not as isolated as it's felt my entire life, that the experience I'm having is indeed an Asian American experience, that I'm that there are commonalities between my experience and other, other Asians who are in my life who are just like, it's
Mhm.
just like crazy because in a way in Baltimore, where as an Asian American I've just felt so invisible, and it's been so difficult to connect with an Asian American community that because of quarantine and because everything switched to Zoom and online, that it's been that community building has become really quite incredible, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's a beautiful thing. There has been some beauty out of the madness of the past year. But I'm glad you mentioned that because I do want to ask you a little bit about it. Because last or before we started recording, um, you were telling me a little bit about how this past year has gone for you, and how there has been kind of like this like creative wellspring that you found. So do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of the projects you've been going through when if
Yeah,
in thinking
absolutely.
about creating Baltimore writer community?
Um, well, what kind of started this whole process is my collection of poetry, which is titled After Midnight,
Mhm.
which after 15 years of thinking about it, probably even more like 16 years now that it's 2021.
Yeah.
Um,
And
I'm
that will be linked somewhere with this video. So if you're
Yeah, cool.
watching
And
this,
I don't
yeah.
really have any social media yet, but I'm working on it.
Right.
But on my personal, yeah. And so but my the reason that my collection is called After Midnight is because it contains poetry that I wrote during bouts of insomnia between midnight and 6 a.m.
Mhm.
As you noted when I started reading the journal entry I read from, that I always note the time and date that I start writing. And so in my collection, each poem starts with a very striking a very simple but striking graphic representation of the time I started writing. The whole inspiration of my book is a digital alarm clock,
Mhm.
with those red, bright red, digital numbers.
Mhm.
And in my childhood, I did a lot of reading and writing by that light, which was, when I was awake at night as a child, the only source of light in my bedroom. And I I've over the course of this quarantine, because I haven't had to work, because I can pretend that my unemployment is I'm some sort of fully funded artist because I'm receiving unemployment and food stamps. Um, and But that allows me to focus on creating my art. I've brought my art practice to the daytime. I really don't do any writing at night unless there's something that's particularly spinning around in my brain. I've in preparation for the launch of my book, I started publishing a bi-monthly zine called Friendship Zine. The point is to celebrate all aspects of friends and friendship, and how we really how by celebrating and focusing on these collaborations, and highlighting these and featuring these friends and friendships and these friendship collaborations, that we can start to build this new community and this new world that we want. And then I have also to advertise the launch, or to, to kind of promote my book launch, started an online open mic called the After Midnight Open Mic. Um, it's on the first Monday of every month, starting at 11:55. And my idea was to provide a setting where people can be in whatever state of sobriety or inebriation they please, in the safety of their home, and we can just come together late at night and talk about poetry. One thing that I found really frustrating as someone with a non-normative 9 to 5 schedule is that there's a wealth of Zoom programming, but none of it is for people who carry late night hours.
Right.
And so I've, even in creating this event, it was interesting how many friends were like, "Well, Brian, I could never possibly make it to this event." And I'm like, "Well, this isn't really for you. Like, there's
Mhm.
plenty of programming for you. This is for someone who's awake at midnight and wants to have a deeper intellectual conversation about about poetry. We specifically talk about poetry, and we center queer, brown, and black voices. Uh, and I've and by and in doing those projects, I've 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 drafted my second collection of poetry, which I'm currently editing. I'm starting to I'm starting to draft pieces for my third collection of poetry. I'm drafting a collection of essays. There's a lot of things that are really close to being done, just simply because I've had time to work on them, and I
Mm-hmm.
have you know, I know it sounds kind of manic and kind of like a frantic pace of production, and it is. But this is a moment. This is a just like every moment in time. This is a fleeting moment in time, and so I'm just trying to get as much out of it as I can in the safety of this space and
Mm-hmm.
during this burst of creative energy. You know.
Yeah, I mean, and you found this creative burst, and you also like you found your people, right? You know, you found like this
Yeah.
community to kind of be with you on that journey, which is so great. I mean, it's earlier when you were talking about the past year, you were kind of saying you were kind of on this government funded kind of artistic residency, which which I appreciate the joke, but that does say something about the nature of creativity and art, and how a lot of the times we seek art as maybe a refuge from these kind of capitalistic lifestyles or structures that we're otherwise forced to be in. Um, and even though it may be a cruel irony of life, the fact that you were in a situation where that was kind of where you could turn to for finding yourself, for productivity, for creativity, and it led you to like this great, place, this great moment where, yeah, your book is coming out, and you've got, it seems like you have more along the way, which is exciting. Always great to hear.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm really happy for it. I'm really happy things are
That's the tip of
going
the
well, at least on that side of things.
yeah. As well as you know, and I've really there's so much in our world right now that is that just forces us to focus on the negative.
Hmm.
And I've really, in those moments, really just tried to focus on my positive, and I realized that that's from that I'm saying that from a tremendous place of privilege, that I have right now, but also um, it's it's from a privilege that I've fought tooth and nail to
Hmm.
achieve and get to.
Definitely, definitely.
It's not just something that I stumbled into. It wasn't an accident. It's my time, and it's about time, and so it's really exciting to feel that, to like truly feel that, and just have, you know, before the quarantine, I had a 2 year a 2 year a 2 decade career, 2 decade 20-year career in the food service industry, and as a queer brown man, that was just so trying on my body and my mind.
Mm.
So it's been as trying as this year has been. It's been easier than the past 20 years before that, and it's been really nice to just have a chance to heal. You know,
Definitely, yeah, we all need it sometimes.
yeah,
um could I ask you to maybe read one more piece as a way of
yes.
closing out?
Yeah. Sunday was the darkest day of my weekend, alone with my thoughts in the coldest and loneliest parts of my mind. My legs and feet followed suit and would not warm up, even though the weather outside should have been able to provide that experience. My equilibrium was off. I researched phrases about suicide online in a way I had never before, and do not want to get comfortable with these thoughts. I thought about my triggers and how even the false systems of support that have been around me for my entire life are a part of these structures, and how much my life continues to improve as I put more distance between myself and these structures and replace them with something else, with frameworks and support that actually work for me and provide me with what I need. This is not easy work. To identify, build, and maintain these frameworks and systems and structures when everything exists to either extract labor from me or to the point of my demise, however and whenever this may be. I have a variety of theories and philosophies about how these poorly and falsely constructed narratives play out, working for someone else's cause your entire life with energy that should be reserved for myself. Suicide. This is not how I will end. Um, I guess, okay, I want to read. This is not how I will end. I am taking active steps to remove this prescribed future from my psyche. And this is not easy work because of how deeply entrenched and taught into my body these structures are and manifest themselves. I am taking the time to do the very difficult work of removing these structures from myself and myself from these structures. And I am making incredible progress, which is why my journey continues with expansive difficulty. Emmanuel Williams, who's DDM, who's a local queer hip hop artist, recently wrote a reminder about his journey and his path, with a reminder to be like water, to identify opportunity, to go with the flow, and to take the path of least resistance. Over again, it's called "These Are the Knots."
Mhm.
These are the knots. The site of my healing is not a conversation with my therapist, a journal entry, a poem, a substance, a phone conversation with a friend, on Zoom, or one of the numerous creative projects into which I pour my numerous waking hours, whether directly or indirectly, directly by working, indirectly by obsessively thinking about every detail so I do not focus on something else. I do not have a TV, but will sometimes watch something on my phone, always the same show and always food related programming. The site of my healing is my body, peace of mind that is lost to racing thoughts. I know it is by design. I feel better when I start my day with no technology, as I quickly check for human interaction, hoping a moment won't count. I watch my neighborhood gentrify. I watch my neighborhood and city gentrify around me and wonder if my own neighborhood, my own city, are even the site of my healing. They are not. The site of my healing is my body. 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 The site of my healing is my body.